Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the quarterly web meeting of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus. I'm Lisa Hanairo. I direct the caucus, and I'm going to be managing the logistics for today's web meeting. We'll start with some housekeeping. First, everyone should know this event is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available later today at the caucus's website, which is greatlateslegislators.org. You'll also receive an email indicating that the recording is available. To reduce the noise on the phone, we've got everybody in listen-only mode, and it'll stay that way during the presentation. But if you have a question, you can ask it at any time, either type questions using the questions pane in the webinar console, or you can click your raise hand icon, which is in the little grab tab. It looks just like a hand. You can also email your question to gllc@csg.org, and I'll be monitoring email, so I'll be able to read your question on the air. And for those of you who are not viewing the screen but are just calling in, which is fine to do, just note that I will not be able to see you, so I can't unmute your line to ask a question orally, but if you email your question to me, I will read it. And for those of you who might raise your hands and want to speak, just a note, you must enter your audio PIN in order for me to unmute your line. This is the agenda for today's web meeting. We'll start with introductions by the GLLC chair, Senator Charbonneau, and then our featured presentation will feature Dr. David Hart. We have a business session at the end with only 3 items covering the resolutions for the 2019 annual meeting, acknowledging tomorrow's occasion of Great Lakes St. Lawrence Appreciation Day, and then we'll also have a final preview of next week's GLLC annual meeting in Chicago. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Senator Charbonneau to welcome everyone. Senator?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone to the today's webinar meeting. As most of you know, what brings the GLLC together is water, and clean water to support our people, our economy, and our environment. We're organized around the guiding principle of assuring that the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River continue to provide a plentiful source of water, not just for all of us today, but for generations to come. Any legislator that is listening or taking part in the webinar today and is not yet a Great Lakes Legislative Caucus member, I encourage you to learn about the organization. We have a lot of great things going on, and would appreciate you considering enrolling as a member. You can do that by visiting our website, and as we remind everybody all the time, there is absolutely no cost to become a member, only benefits. And one of the issues on our policy agenda is to better understand, and try to anticipate the needs of coastal communities. And that's why on today's web meeting, we're turning our attention to a significant problem affecting these communities. That's high water levels. It was only 5 or 6 years ago that we were talking about and worried about historic low levels on some of the lakes. That trend has reversed itself, and many of our coastal communities are really struggling with the impact of high water. So today we're going to learn about what is happening, what the impacts are on our communities, and what can be done to help address the problem. It's my hope that we as legislators may have an opportunity to contribute to the solution through state and provincial policy. And I'm glad to have with us today, and very glad to be able to introduce as we try to understand the the impact of these high water levels is David Hart, Assistant Director for Extension at the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute. Dr. Hart assists local governments and other coastal constituents in the areas of mapping, community planning, coastal hazards, land use, and climate adaptation. He holds a PhD in land resources from the University of Michigan-Madison. He received his Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Michigan and his master's degree at the University of New Orleans. And with that introduction, I would like to turn the floor over to Dr. Hart. Dr. Hart?
Yes, thank you so much, Senator Charbonneau, for that introduction. What I would like to present on is reflecting on an integrated assessment that we were part of a couple of years ago that looked at the challenges and issues associated with communities on the Great Lakes and the changing water levels that happen. And so just the things that I would like to cover in this presentation include just a little bit of background about Sea Grant. I suppose that some of you are aware of Sea Grant programs in your coastal states. Some may not. So I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction to what the National Sea Grant College Program is, and particularly how you might be able to leverage the research and the outreach and education that goes on in the Great Lakes. I'd then like to jump into this Great Lakes Water Level Integrated Assessment, talk a little bit about what an integrated assessment is and some of the big picture things that we learned from the 4 place-based projects, and then go into depth in our project and highlight some of the options that we came up with for communities and property owners to adapt to changing water levels. And then finally end up with some resources, some programs, and some state legislative actions that have gone around that are addressing this issue. So that's my overarching structure here. And if I have some messages, that would be, first of all, that there are some options out there for communities to undertake, and there are people in Sea Grant programs and coastal management programs and that are out there to help on these particular issues. So first, a bit about Sea Grant. The National Sea Grant College Program is administered by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It was founded about 50 years ago in 1968. Currently, there are 33 state programs in oceans and Great Lakes states. The program is modeled after land-grant colleges and cooperative extension. And one of the key people involved in the idea behind Sea Grant was a professor of oceanography at the University of Minnesota, Athelstan Spilhaus. And he saw the investment that the country made in land-grant colleges that go back to Abraham Lincoln's time and to cooperative extension, that idea of extending university research out to people who could benefit from that research. A great example is agriculture, doing research on agricultural productivity and getting that information out to farmers. He saw that investment and said it was one of the best investments the country ever made, and he thought it should be applied to coastal issues. And the big coastal issue in the 1960s that people were concerned about were depletion of fisheries. Since then, there are a number of issues that Sea Grant programs are involved with. And again, the major background is that the Sea Grant program leverages a network of universities around the country to conduct research on pressing coastal issues, and then has the mechanism through outreach specialists and communications to get that message out to stakeholders and constituents who could benefit from that. So that's a little background about the Sea Grant program. In the Great Lakes, there are 8 programs, including a program on Lake Champlain that's shared by Vermont and New York. And you look at this map here, those dots represent the programs offices as well as outreach offices. And there are more than 75 staff addressing outreach and education situated on the Great Lakes, and most of those are in Great Lakes coastal communities. So, if you look at your districts and you look at your areas, there's likely a Sea Grant outreach specialist with willing to help and situated in these coastal communities. I want to give a kind of a face to some of these people, particularly those that have been working on water levels and coastal hazards. In New York State, Mary Osterman leads the extension program there. She's stationed on Lake Ontario. She's been doing a lot of work helping communities respond from the flooding that's happened on Lake Ontario 2017 and this year, including some visioning sessions for communities to explore how they can become more resilient after experiencing these flooding events. Sarah Stallman leads the extension program in Pennsylvania Sea Grant. She's based in Erie, and she has worked to create a local resilience action network in Erie that brings people together to address the concerns there. Roy Widrig is a coastal processes and coastal hazard specialist. He has a wide range of resources that he's put together that are helpful in dealing with changes along the Great Lakes. In our program in Wisconsin, Adam Beckley is a coastal engineer, has been doing a lot of one-on-one work with property owners and with communities on strategies that they can use to address water levels. Mark Breedlin is a go-to person in Michigan based in Traverse City. He's been working with the Corps of Engineers and state officials to arrange a series of workshops. The most recent, I believe, happened in Port Huron, Michigan, about water levels and understanding better what's happening and what could be done. And then finally, Sarah Orlando is in Ohio, in Sandusky. She's an expert in marinas, and particularly how marinas can be more clean and environmentally conscious, as well as being more resilient to the kind of storms that can affect marinas. So just 6 of the 75 outreach specialists that are out there that you can tap into in the Sea Grant network. To give you a bit of a visual perspective of the issue that we're dealing with, this is a snapshot of the Great Lakes water level dashboard. These dots, these blue dots that you see, represent water levels, monthly average water levels for 100 years since 1920. And you can see in the case of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, water levels go up and go down. You can see that in the 1970s, we had a period of high water levels. In the 80s and in the 90s, and then right around the turn of the century in 2000, water levels dropped pretty quickly, and for about 15 years they were below average. And then you can see we come up, and down here this little dot represents January 2013, where we hit a record low water level on Lake Michigan, and shortly after that, a combination of cold winters, the polar vortex, and increasing the ice cover on the lakes and reducing evaporation and some wet years, and we rebounded very quickly. And now we're currently in the situation that you see in the last few years here, where on Lake Michigan and Huron, we're approaching high record water levels, but on other Great Lakes, they've exceeded these water levels. And I just give a couple pictures here just to visualize. The one on the bottom here shows a dock that's stranded by low water levels. And when that happens, property owners are happy because they have big beaches, but boaters and shippers are not so happy because the access to their infrastructure, or maybe how much they can load on their ships, is impacted. And when we have high water levels, this is an example in the 1970s in Green Bay of the kind of flooding that we see when you have storms on top of high water levels. So just a very quick visualization. I include links here to some resources, and if you like to explore data, the Great Lakes Water Level Dashboard is a great way to understand water levels in the lakes and what's happened over time. So into this integrated assessment, it was specifically designed to deal with these high and low water level periods, and particularly when it started in 2014 and 15, it was really addressing the rapid increase in water levels in most of the Great Lakes. And the question that they put forward was, what environmentally, socially, politically, and economically feasible policy options and management actions can people and businesses and governments implement in order to adapt to current and future Great Lakes water levels? And so that was the charge. They put out a call for teams to participate, and had 7 teams that signed up for kind of a preliminary analysis, and they ended up selecting 4 teams as they move forward. The integrated assessments, they're a little bit different way to do to study these types of issues than maybe traditional hypothesis-driven research. The integrated assessments acknowledge that there are complex problems out there, like the impacts that come from water levels, where facts are uncertain, values are in conflicts, the stakes are high, and decisions are urgent. And they say the approach that needs to be taken is to bring together natural scientists, social science, and policy analysis to really to look at this issue from a variety of different perspectives and not just kind of ground down into one way of looking at things, and that you really need to be collaborative in doing that. And the researchers that are involved in these kind of studies need to connect with resource managers, with policymakers, and especially with the public. And what these assessments do are develop a range of policies and actions to consider, but not try to come up with specific prescriptions or recommendations. Instead, get a broad range of options and let elected officials and local officials and other people involved in the policy arena kind of sort through which ones work in their particular areas. So that's the approach. It's a little bit different. It requires big thinking and lots of public engagement. And just another perspective on this, it shows that when you can bring together a natural science, a policy science perspective, and a policy perspective, you can end up informing decisions in a good way. If you leave some pieces out, you can disconnect key groups. Like if you don't include social science, you don't really understand how people are affected by these decisions. If we just study things by social and natural science and leave out policy, you don't understand very well how decisions are made. So just a graphical way to show that here. So again, I had mentioned that there are 4 place-based projects that were part of this 2-year study. And we in Wisconsin looked at an area just north of Milwaukee, 8 communities north of Milwaukee. There were 2 projects in Michigan, one that focused on local issues in Grand Haven on the Lake Michigan coast, and another group that looked at tribal fisheries and culture in northern Michigan. And then finally, there was a group in Huron County, Goderich, Ontario on the Lake Huron coast that also had kind of a coastal hazards focus to them. So those were the 4 main projects that came out of this integrated assessment. And I'll just touch very lightly on some big level pictures. So as far as options go, there were 4 main categories of options that the final report, which was released in February of 2018, came up with. Options that centered around planning and coordination, around shoreline stabilization, around land use and shoreline management practices, and then a set of options that relate to education and outreach. And I'm not going to go into depth in these right here because our study kind of had a similar set of options, and I'll dive deeper into those in our Wisconsin study. But I do want to hit on some kind of overarching themes that were kind of common across the 4 integrated assessments that were undertaken. And the first one is understanding capacity is very important. At the local level where we did our projects, capacity is variable, and you should really work and be aware of the capabilities within particular communities to be able to develop the strategies and move forward with them. The context that you're working with is very important. Oftentimes we put out broad general policy recommendations, but in order to specifically apply them in particular places, you really need to understand what kind of issues those communities are working with. On jurisdictions, another overarching theme, it's really important to understand what authorities are in the decision-making environment, particularly when there are multiple players at different levels involved. So it's important to know that institutional framework in the jurisdictions. And again, you really want to understand in your area who the key institutions and critical partners are, and how can you engage them in the best way possible with limited resources and time that you have oftentimes on these kind of projects. I think a very important overarching theme was was how you engage the public. And it's really important to be able to listen to stakeholders and not just some that speak from a single voice, from a wide range of perspectives, and really engage in a thoughtful manner. And we in our project worked with a husband and wife a team of community engagement specialists that had decades of experience, and it really helped shape and increase the success of our project. So the statement here is how you engage input is also very important. That you do it, but how you do it can also be important as well. And the last is that in these types of broad, complex studies, there's going to be a degree of uncertainty, and sometimes that precludes or hinders people from taking action. But there are tools like scenario planning or adaptive management that can let you gather information in an ongoing way and make some decisions while always striving to get more information to make better decisions. So those are some of the overarching themes from the water level study that the University of Michigan sponsored. I want to go into our particular study in Wisconsin. We worked with 8 communities just north of Milwaukee, in Milwaukee County and Ozaukee County. These communities are situated on high glacial bluffs that are anywhere from 80 to 150 feet, and those bluffs tend to erode at a faster rate during high water levels when waves crash against the toes. And so this is our particular place-based location. We had a wide range of staff and scientists that worked with us that represented a variety of disciplines, from civil engineering to geology to aquatic ecology to beach health and policy studies. We had key partners in the Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, our state's coastal management program, and the Department of Natural Resources and Emergency Management Agency, as well as the Professional Association of State Floodplain Managers. So those were the range of people that we worked with on our project. Just a little visual assessment of our area and some trends that were happening. One is, again, with these high bluffs, we were seeing from the 1970s up to now kind of an increase in armoring or protecting the shore along Lake Michigan. You can see in Ozaukee County, it increased from about 10% to 27%. In Milwaukee County, up close to 62%. If you go a little south of Milwaukee, Racine and Kenosha counties are protected, have shore protection up in the 70 to 85% range. So definitely a trend in property owners protecting their shoreline. You kind of see an example of that here. But we saw up until 2012, and again, that represents that 15-year period of low water levels that started around 2000, we were seeing, because of that protection, probably also because of low water levels, that the bluffs were stabilizing. We're getting more stable in time, and I think our high water levels have maybe started to change that dynamic. But up until 2012, we were seeing an increase in bluff stability in this particular area. And this shows a profile view of a bluff, and the dashed line represents the steeper bluffs that were in place during the higher water levels in the 1970s. You can see that as we kind of move forward to 2012, this red line, the bluffs got more stable, but a lot of the material that was coming off the bluffs were accumulating down at the bottom of the bluff, and now the higher water levels have started to wash that away. So that's something that we kind of saw the trend in time. Now you kind of take a look at this represents a photo from August of 2016 in the city of Mequon, and you can see that there's not a beach in this area, and you can see the sediment in the water that represents the waves coming in and washing away the bluffs and steepening up the shores. And in the area south of Milwaukee, we have shorter bluffs. They've started to see more serious erosion. That's been happening in the area north of Milwaukee. It takes a little while to reach a critical kind of profile to start the erosion at the top of the bluff, but we've definitely seen that erosion process happening at the bottom of the bluff in these areas. And then I just wanted our most recent set of photos were taken in April of 2018, and you can see that we've got some accelerated erosion happening in the area, and you can also see a little bit about some of the impact that structures have on neighboring properties as well through this image. So to get into our community engagement side, we had 3 public meetings in the summer of 2016 associated with our project, and each had a very different feel to it. The Port Washington and Grafton meeting was in the northern part of our study area, and that was one that attracted a lot of media support. There was a lot of television and radio and newspaper attention on this particular meeting. We had a lot of people that were from even north of our study area in areas where homes were more low-lying on the water, and they were quite concerned about coastal flooding. In Mequon, our middle meeting was the largest attendance that we had, and a major issue there was shoreline protection and impacts on neighboring property owners. And then finally, our last one was in the communities in northern Milwaukee County, and what the big concern there was the loss of their environmental amenities, like the loss of beaches and the ability to walk along beaches. So each meeting had a very distinctly different feel to it. To give an idea of what we did, the meetings were approximately 2.5 hours long in the evening. We started with a pretty extensive set of welcomes and introductions to make people feel heard and welcome at the beginning of the meeting. We did give some technical information about water levels and coastal bluffs and provided resources that were available for addressing erosion. We spent a lot of our time on a brainstorming exercise that let people express their hopes and wishes and their issues and concerns with the future of their bluffs and their shores. And then also, very importantly, we spent some time in the end reflecting and hearing from what people got out of the meeting. And in each of our 3 meetings, this reflection and the brainstorming exercise left people in a better place at the end of the meeting than I think they were at the beginning of the meeting. So again, I think using community engagement specialists to structure the meeting was very helpful. So this kind of shows a bit of an example of us grouping what we heard from people's hopes and wishes and issues and concerns. And just to kind of set a couple themes from what we heard in these meetings. One, where people, property owners wanted to hear more about the collective action that they could take and what were some of the legal and financial solutions that were out there for their issues. They definitely wanted more education about legislation and legislative change. They wanted to understand more about erosion processes and options for stabilizing their property. They wanted education, and they wanted to hear more and understand the causes of lake level variability, and they also wanted us to know that the coasts were an important environmental asset to them, and that aspect was very important as well too. So now I want to present some of the options we came up with after we got people's issues and concerns and consulted with a wide range of experts. We started to come up with some ideas of what people could do. And the first theme was erosion control and bluff stability. And the first area we saw were low impact practices, moving your building back, construction that was easier to move, and using green infrastructure or low impact practices, particularly on the top of the bluff for how the bluff's drained. Again, you saw some of these themes in bluff stability practice on how you manage your stormwater on top can have a big influence on how fast your bluff erodes. How you dewater the bluffs and the possibility for regrading bluffs. Traditional practices for shore protection, like revetments and seawalls and breakwaters and groins, were the third theme. And then how you can incorporate nature-based approaches was the fourth theme, like living breakwaters or living revetments, where you incorporate vegetation into these kind of more structural practices. Our second set were policy options of more interest to local officials. There was definitely a strong interest in collaboration, as I mentioned. So how can you collaborate with your neighbors? How can you vision what you want your bluff to be like? Second theme was, what are some of the financial solutions out there as well? The third was changes in permitting, making it easier and to understand permitting issues and just to go through the process. And then finally, some different types of policies like bluff vegetation ordinances or stormwater ordinances, and how just coordinating these approaches among different municipalities. So, and then finally, we had 3 different themes of education and outreach activities and publications, and then finally mapping and decision tools that can help people understand the issues a little bit better. So these are the range of options that we came up with. And we held a meeting in October of 2016, and we used clickers to get input on whether people liked a particular option. We went through all the options we had developed, whether they were neutral on the option or whether they didn't like the option, or whether they just needed to know more about it before they could even rate it. And so just a couple slides here to kind of give the feedback that we learned from doing this. One was, in general, there was a recognition that greening of conventional approaches of stormwater management were looked upon favorably. There was, interest in traditional approaches. People were pretty skeptical about the effectiveness of just pure green nature-based approaches, particularly along open stretches of the coast. That those approaches wouldn't be effective, but they also liked this idea that you could combine these approaches, and that was of interest. Generally speaking, the outreach and tools, there was universal support for more outreach and more education, and in a way that's kind of a safe set of options to be able to learn more about what's going on. And then finally, on the policy perspective, there was definitely support for collaboration, but people wanted more information on the specifics of policy initiatives. They really wanted to see how they could, property owners could collaborate with their neighbors. They were concerned, I think, about new formal legal frameworks. There was some interest in broader scale solutions, like at the Great Lakes regional level for dealing with water levels. And there was definitely interest in making permitting practices easier for putting in structural practices. And then finally, people liked an idea of a trigger mechanism for policy changes, meaning if water levels hit a certain level, then you might go back and comprehensively look at the set of policies you have to deal with development along the shoreline. So these are a few of the reactions that were out there to the options that we put forward. And we've organized these options and now have a set of probably 40 or so options in 2 different publications, both titled Adapting to a Changing Coast. The one on the left is particularly geared towards property owners. The one on the right is more geared towards local officials. And just to kind of show you what a page looks like, an option presented in 2 pages. This is showing a revetment as a structural shore protection option. You have just some basic benefits and challenges to those, a real quick summary of the purpose and the challenges and the costs associated with developing. If you at the bottom of the left-hand page, there are resources that if you want to do a deeper dive into this particular approach, this is where you would do it. And then we just wanted to have some visuals so you could see what these options look like. And so in each report, there's probably 20 to 30 options that are presented that you can take a closer look at. And I do have these in a box folder that I'll share on the last slide of my presentation, so you can get your hands on these. I want to end here, so I'm hitting the home stretch. And I just want to mention what some states are doing, state legislators are doing to address high water levels. These are a couple of examples. I don't know about these in great detail, but perhaps legislators from these states can go into more depth about these. One in Ohio last year enacted a special improvement district that would allow bonding property owners to group together along a stretch of the coast. And if they can get 75% of the property owners to come together, they can look at forming a special improvement district that would allow them to have an additional levy and group that together to be able to do collective actions along the shoreline. And I guess from what I understand in Ohio, there might be a couple communities that are beginning to look into this. In New York, on Lake Ontario, there were high record water levels in 2017 and again here in 2019. And the governor has created a fund that allows property owners to get up to $50,000 in state funding to help offset their damages to their residences. I believe the name of the program is called REDI, R-E-D-I. So that's a program in New York. And in Indiana, there's a sand dredging law that says that companies that remove sand from the Port of Indiana or industrial water intake pipes should deposit that sand on regional beaches to help to nourish them rather than having that sand go offshore. So again, just a couple examples of how state legislators and state governments have jumped in with these kind of current water levels that we're addressing. And then an example I want to share is a project that we have in southeastern Wisconsin. It's funding from NOAA to our state's coastal management program over 3 years to really look at building resilience to coastal hazards in 4 counties and 22 municipalities near Milwaukee. And we've got 4 things that are going on. We're building a network of these communities and getting them together on a regular basis to share ideas. We're doing much more extensive research on coastal processes and bluff and shore erosion and understanding that issue much better. Here at Sea Grant, we're helping to create guidance on risk reduction practices. We have a bluff property owners guide, and we're looking at nature-based shoreline protection practices that could work on the Great Lakes. And finally, we had a funding competition to help fund and implement some local resilience options. So 8 local projects from the Port of Milwaukee to Kenosha and the city of Milwaukee and Racine as well, and then Ozaukee County have funded projects to take on particular actions. And so I think that there's a lot of specific information about Southeast Wisconsin, but a lot of general information as well. So I do think these kind of networks or community of practices are a good thing when you're dealing with a common issue. And so you might want to look at this as a potential model. And then finally, I want to make sure to point out that state coastal management programs are a very strong resource for addressing these issues. And in Ontario, I know conservation authorities that are along the coast are also a go-to resource as well. I don't know so much about the infrastructure or the institutions in Quebec that may address these issues, but I wanted to mention these as key players in addressing water levels in both the U.S. and Canada. So with that, I'm just going to leave this slide up here, and hopefully I've left a little bit of time for some questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hart. I appreciate the presentation, very informative. I think we have a minute or two for some questions. And just very quickly, when you talked about the 75 outreach locations and you showed the map, the vast majority of them seem to be on the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico. But I noticed there was one in Indiana. I mean, it looked like it was maybe down in Indianapolis, and I don't know if you have any specific information on what that is. And if you don't, that's fine. The second piece is funding. That's always seems to be a key issue. And what kind of options for funding have you come across?
Sure. Well, first I'll talk about the Sea Grant program. So Indiana and Illinois have a combined program, and it's managed out of Purdue University and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. That's where the management of those programs happen. And then there are a number of specialists that are on the Indiana and Chicago area coast as well. So Leslie Dorworth is a specialist at I believe it's the Calumet University. So I know she covers the Indiana coast in that area. So, and there are probably a number of other specialists that have Indiana ties as well too. And I know there are many of them that are co-located. Many other Indiana, Illinois Sea Grant specialists are co-located with the EPA in downtown Chicago. So, so there's probably I think there's probably between the two states there are probably 16, 17 specialists. In those two states that are associated with the Sea Grant program. As far as funding goes, I think the structures, is different in different states. I know that we oftentimes turn to our state's emergency management program and they have some options on funding, and particularly tied to mitigating coastal hazards or flooding hazards. So that's a go-to place, I think. Each state has an individual program. In New York right now, I think the governor has allocated, I think, $300 million to property owners through kind of a special, this special ready circumstance. And so, so I think in each state or each province, the funding mechanisms are a little bit different, and in some cases it may come down to is there the political will to be able to come up with some sources to be able to help people out in particular situations. I hope that's a helpful answer.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
This is Lisa. I was just going to remind the folks who are attending that if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can type it in the questions pane on your control panel, or you can always email it to me at gllc@csg.org and I'll read it on the air. And if we don't have time for Dr. Hart to answer any questions I received today, then I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them through email. I did have just a couple of quick questions. One, what is is there going to be any follow-up to these integrated assessments that have already been done? It sounds like the one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily the best one because of the capacity issues of the different coastal communities to deal with the problem. And given the variability, I'm just wondering if there's a plan to conduct further ones in different locations throughout the Great Lakes. And then my second question would be thinking back to your slide that showed the historic water levels, are the highs going to get higher with increasing storms and in the intensity of storms, or is this cyclical variation just something that has been happening all along and it's just getting a lot more attention now?
Great. Yeah, thank you. I'll start with the first question about the integrated assessments. I'm not aware that the University of Michigan in particular is going to undertake another integrated assessment of water levels. I do know that there was some momentum that was created in these individual 4 projects. In our case, I think the momentum that came out of our project caused us to band together and apply for this NOAA regional resilience funding. That's the current project that we have in place. And so we were able to expand from 8 communities in southeastern Wisconsin to 22 communities and have much more resources to be able to carry out and implement some of the ideas that we had come up with. I imagine that in Huron County, Ontario, there's probably some continued momentum that came out of their integrated assessment, as well as in Grand Haven. I know Professor Norton at the University of Michigan is continuing to to look at this, look at these issues, he's got a planning and legal background, and look at how to apply those areas. So I think that there's momentum coming out of the individual integrated assessment projects. And finally, I'll say our Sea Grant program, all Sea Grant programs get reviewed pretty extensively every 4 years, and we presented our integrated assessment, and the review panel really liked it, encouraged us to continue to nurture that along. So when we were reviewed, it resonated very well. As far as water levels go, I think maybe I can kind of quickly jump back a bunch of slides and show that, show the things here, and show this graphic again. And this is, again, 100 records of monthly mean water levels on Lake Michigan. And when you look at this, we hit a record low just 6 years ago and are approaching a record high. And I think that, we can say, well, historically, we have this 6-foot range, but I think that it would be prudent for communities to think that maybe we can exceed these boundaries, maybe by a foot on either side, because look at how quickly these water levels have jumped up and how different they are in just a very short time period. So, I think that what we've seen recently kind of shows that we might need to think a little bit more broadly about the water levels that we're beginning to experience here. And I think if you go to other lakes like Lake Ontario, where twice in the last 3 years, record high water levels have been exceeded. So I think it makes sense to think that maybe we can go a little further outside these boundaries.
Great, thank you. Well, I don't see any incoming questions, and we are trying to wrap up in an hour, so I think we'll move on.
Dr. Hart, thank you very much for your presentation, and we're going to move on to other things, so you're welcome to stay on, or at this point you're welcome to get off the phone and go about your business. So again, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll move into the business section, and we have 3 items to quickly go over. The first one is with the caucus meeting next week in Chicago. We wanted to share with everyone the proposed resolutions that have come from members that we'll be considering on the 14th. And keeping with the caucus procedures, the resolutions were approved by the executive committee. There are only 2 resolutions, and Representative Schultz, I don't know if you're on the phone or not, but if you are, would you care to comment on the 2 resolutions? Okay, I don't hear Representative Schultz, so quickly, the resolution 19-1 urges the US EPA to increase research efforts on microplastics. Research is considered necessary because we still don't know of all the sources of microplastics in the environment, including how much is coming from wastewater treatment facilities. In addition, we don't yet know the full impacts of microplastics on the environment or on human health. Second resolution, 19-2, urges the federal government, both the United States and Canada, provide appropriate resources to support research on the impacts of non-invasive fish stocking of the Great Lakes. These are non-native fish include salmon, which help support the region's $7 billion commercial and sport fishery. Some of the researchers are concerned about the impacts that even these desirable non-native species might have on native fish populations, and at the very least, the research would help inform stocking levels of non-native species of fish and prey to support sustainable native fish populations. That was just a quick review of the two resolutions. I encourage the members to review the resolutions, and any comments or questions, you can refer them to Lisa before next Friday. And in Chicago, we'll vote on the resolutions during the closing business session of on September 14th. And the next item, I want to take just a few minutes to acknowledge a very important occasion. One that I am proud to say is the result of the hard work of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus members. Tomorrow, September 7th, several of our states will officially be observing Great Lakes St. Lawrence Appreciation Day, a day to honor these regional treasures, spread the word about how very important the lakes and rivers are to our way of life. The caucus chose September 7th because it's the date on which the U.S. and Canada signed the revised Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement in 2012. I'm also proud to say that Indiana was the first state to pass the resolution to declare the holiday of appreciation, and glad to report that yesterday Governor Holcomb issued a proclamation joining Indiana in having one or more chambers pass the resolution are Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. In some states, like Wisconsin, the resolution unfortunately didn't make it out of the legislature in time, so the governors have been asked to issue a proclamation. And I think we all certainly hope that they do so. As Great Lakes Legislative Caucus Chair, I'm pleased with our progress in taking coordinated regional action to celebrate the Great Lakes. My hope is that next year we'll get all 10 jurisdictions to proclaim September 7th a day of celebration. And I encourage everyone on the line to share your stories about the Great Lakes tomorrow, or share facts, figures, and photos so we can all spread the word about the vital importance of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River to us, our states and provinces, the region, and our two nations. If you do post anything on social media, we encourage you to use the hashtag GLSLAD and hashtag Great Lakes to get the message out. Who knows, maybe we can even get the topic to trend. Now I'll turn things over to Lisa, who will give us a final preview of what's ahead at the annual meeting in a week or so. Lisa?
Thank you, Senator Charbonneau. Yes, it's just 1 week from today that the caucus's meeting will kick off on a very lucky day, September 13th, Friday. We'll start with a workshop for the task force on lead. That'll take place from 7:30 to 11:30 in the morning. And for those who will be attending, note that breakfast will be served at 7:30, so that's an incentive to come early. Following that, we'll have a short break so that the task force members can get ready for the site visit. We have a full bus, 45 people are signed up for the site visit. That's going to be heading out to Brandon Road Lock and Dam in the western suburbs of Chicago, and we'll also get to see the electric dispersal barriers and maybe one or two other sites while we're out west. The site visit is longer than we typically do for these afternoon visits, but that's simply because the transportation, given the Chicago traffic, it's going to take a while to get out there. We do have some presentations scheduled for the bus ride, and lunch will be served. We have box lunches ordered for everybody. So please, if you're going on the site visit, make sure that you are on the bus before 12 p.m. because we will leave promptly at 12 p.m. Coming back, we have a little bit of a break so the site visit attendees can freshen up, and there will be a reception with light hors d'oeuvres and beer and wine from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And the following day, September 14th, that's well, it used to be the big one, but it looks like September 13th is kind of big too. On the 14th, the executive committee gets to have breakfast bright and early for their meeting, and that's from 7 a.m. to 8:15. Then after a short break, the caucus's 2019 annual meeting for all members will convene at 8:30. And I anticipate we will wrap up at 5:30. We have a great agenda in store. Today I'll be sending out the final agenda and an attendance list, and I'll also send a list of those who are signed up for the site visit, so you'll know that you're on. And just a reminder that all events will take place at the Wyndham Grand Chicago Riverfront Hotel at 71 East Wacker Drive. And there is discounted parking available, although those of you who have ever parked your car overnight in Chicago know that it's, even with a discount, it's going to be pretty pricey. So, so I encourage everybody who is driving to, just be mindful that you might want to check out other parking options. But the hotel does have valet parking available. I believe it's $66 a night normally, and there's a 10% break for those who are attending the caucus's meeting. And finally, if anybody's going to be sharing pictures or information from the meeting on social media, we ask you to use hashtag 2019 GLLC. And if you could also mention the caucus at GLL Caucus, that would be great to get the word out about the meeting and make sure we're all using the same tags. And back to you, Senator Charbonneau.
Okay, all right, thank you. That concludes our agenda. And I appreciate everyone that was able to take the time and join us. The presentation, I think for everybody, we have a huge issue. I don't know if Senator Talion is on today or not, but with beach erosion in a couple of the communities on the lake, and it was very timely presentation and information. I appreciate everyone that's been involved. Thank you, Lisa, for all the help you are and have been and will continue to be, hopefully, as we move on. I think I'm very proud of what the caucus has been able to achieve, where we're headed, and thank everyone. And with that, we will be adjourned. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And watch your email for a message from the GoToWebinar site sharing the link to the recording. And we'll also make sure that the materials mentioned today get posted on our website later this afternoon. And mark your calendars for December 13th for the next quarterly web meeting. Note that that is 1 week later than originally planned. That's simply to avoid conflicting with the CSG National Meeting in Puerto Rico for those who will be attending. And with that, the webinar is concluded. I hope everybody will have a great weekend and an especially great Great Lakes St. Lawrence Appreciation Day tomorrow. Please make sure to share your stories on social media and spread the word about these wonderful inland seas that we're all blessed to live near. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.